The Institute of Economic Justice, together with a broad coalition of African and global civil society organizations, have written an open letter to President Cyril Ramaphosa calling for urgent action on the global debt crisis under South Africa's G20 presidency. Now, the letter urges South Africa to show decisive leadership in advancing debt justice, particularly for countries in Africa and the global south. And for more on this, we are now joined in studio by Nerissa Muthian, a G20 researcher with the Institute for Economic Justice. And Nerissa, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. I mean, let's start off here. Maybe tell us more about this open letter in which you wrote earlier this year to President Cyril Ramaphosa, just detailing some of the issues that we are facing as South Africa and as the continent.
Of course, thank you so much for having me this evening, Bali, and good evening to all the viewers watching at home. Debt is an issue that we were hoping to really see progress on during South Africa's G20 presidency this year, and it's an issue that so far we have not seen gain the momentum it needs to gain. It is one of the 4 priorities of this presidency, and debt affects everyone. A lot of the G20 issues feel very abstract. They feel very much, what is the G20? Why does it matter? I think most people are experiencing the road closures this week and they're trying to figure out what is going on. But as much as these are abstract issues, they affect everyday South Africans' lives. It affects whether you have food in your cupboards, whether you can access healthcare services. We spend more money servicing debt than we do on health or education. And this really needs to be a priority that we're really hoping to see some substantial progress on this year.
And when it comes to, you know, what you have done as civil society, since you penned this open letter to the president, just take us through some of the programs which you've undertaken to try and highlight some of these issues and what it actually means for ordinary South Africans.
Of course, of course. As an official research partner to the G20 Sherpa, the IEJ has played a very close role in helping the government drive progressive issues. We've supported a variety of task forces and working groups on issues such as green industrial policy, energy transitions, women's empowerment, and food security. And the idea is really championing global South outcomes to drive tangible changes that prioritize everyday South Africans, that prioritizes people over profit, and really puts Africa at the forefront of global decision-making.
And you keep on highlighting some of the issues when it comes to food security and challenges which we are facing in the country. And one would also then ask, how important is this G20, particularly for South Africa, when it remains one of the most unequal societies in the world?
I think that's exactly why the G20 is important for South Africa, because of the inequality, because of the issues we're facing this year. The theme of South Africa's G20 is solidarity, sustainability, and equality. And the idea is that we really should be seeing outcomes within the next 7 days that champion this, that help create a better world. In the next 7 days, we're going to see outcomes that create a future of obstacles or a future of opportunity. And we really hope that the African priorities are at the center.
Talking about African priorities, and when we see this G20 kickoff next week, what should the president prioritize during this G20, particularly in terms of how it will affect South Africans?
I think key priorities is stabilizing food prices, energy flows, cancelling debt, helping with tax, and I would just say overall development, and especially jobs. You know, in South Africa, we're really struggling with unemployment right now. And the G20 is where we can kind of see changes that will then trickle down into South African society and help us have a more accessible, affordable, everyday life.
I know that we're speaking a lot about, you know, South Africa, but we do know that this is the first time that the G20 is held on African soil. And a bit earlier on, you touched on issues around debt that we face, not only as South Africa, but also as other developing nations on the continent. And when it comes to, you know, the African countries in particular, what should the president also then focus on in terms of how this will impact and better the lives of those on the continent?
I think you're touching on a very important point, right? This is a historic moment. This is the first time that all these major economies are going to be on the African continent. This is a chance for us to really bring the priorities and the voice of African countries when it comes to things like debt, when it comes to things like critical minerals, and just really situations where African countries need to be at the forefront of global decision making. The African Union is now in its 2nd year as a G20 country. It's also the first time we're going to be having so many African guest countries in the G20, such as Algeria, Nigeria, and Egypt. And we're hoping that their involvement, as well as the African Union, as well as South Africa's presidency, can really just ensure that African initiatives and African priorities are driven and prioritized this year.
And prioritizing African needs. And one would also then ask, what should this G20 then mean for the rest of the continent?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's a question we'll see in 7 days, but I'm hoping and I'm optimistic that we're going to see very strong commitment from G20 countries to create a world that's more fair, that's more equal, that's more progressive, and that really sees that African countries have so much of potential, and this potential deserves to be recognized and given a seat at the table.
Thank you so much, Nerissa. Really great talking to you just in the build-up there of the G20 Leaders Summit. Of course, that is Nerissa Muthian, a G20 researcher. She is with the Institute of Economic Justice.